A long-standing diplomatic row between the UK and Greece has re-erupted this week. The Greek government has been campaigning for years to have the famous Elgin Marbles returned to them after they were taken by the British over 200 years ago.
Well, this week the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak cancelled a meeting with his Greek counterpart in London after Kyriakos Mitsotakis raised the issue once again. Well, that caused quite a commotion in the British Parliament.
Never mind the British Museum, it's the Prime Minister who's obviously lost his marbles.
But all jokes aside, it's definitely a prickly issue for the two European allies. Dr. Evangelos Kyriakidis is an archaeologist and the founding director of the Heritage Management Organisation. I spoke to him a little earlier this morning and asked why the ancient sculptures were significant to the British.
These marbles are obviously very historic, they are very important. The UK, a lot of UK politicians, a lot of UK professionals, a lot of the UK public feel that Greek heritage is also their heritage, and this is understandable. Nobody can take that away from anyone. And also the British Museum has actually had then been constructed around the room for the Parthenon marbles, and so it was a crucial piece back then. It's not anymore, because with the extension of the museum it has stopped being the centerpiece. So obviously we're talking a very important part of the collection of a very important museum for the UK, which is very much part of the life and education of the average British citizen. So
British public, though, didn't seem as fazed as the government was over this particular issue. I wonder what the general perception in Greece is over these ancient artifacts.
Well, for Greeks, but I think also the same applies to Australians and to everyone else. For Greeks, these marbles are very much similar to a national symbol. More people would arguably recognize the Parthenon and the Acropolis than the Greek flag. And so for the Greek people to have something that looks like a national symbol to them in a museum called British obviously doesn't sit very well, especially as that museum is clearly a colonial museum, displaying artifacts from all over the world and putting them in a museum called British. Now, is it for the British people or is it a museum of British heritage? Either can be offensive.
Now, the British Museum's chair, George Osborne, has said that the institution will consider loaning the Parthenon marbles to Athens. Is this enough to appease Greek frustration?
Obviously, a loan would not be sufficient because it would continue being an affront. Imagine if a small museum or a big museum in Greece, let's say the National Museum, National Archaeological Museum, had the crown jewels displayed, and the head of the Greek National Museum accepted for the crown jewels to be displayed temporarily in Britain as a loan. It doesn't really sound appropriate. There are many other solutions, and one of these solutions is one, I think, that is being discussed or has been proposed for many years now, that the room that these marbles are at the moment can be used for the display of multiple heritage collections from Greece, from top items from Greek museums, that could be creating temporary exhibitions, which would enhance the educational character of the museum, which would enhance the, the tourism inflow for the museum, and would actually benefit British people who would be going to see these artifacts several times. Because at the moment they are just going there once or twice in their life to just see the Parthenon marbles. Right. I don't really imagine that people go much more often on average.
Right. Now, just on another matter, this week, the Smithsonian in the US repatriated ancestral remains of 14 Indigenous people back to Australia. Are you seeing more museums leaning towards the restitution of cultural property now?
I think this has been one of the fears of the British Museum, and it was certainly a fear in the 1980s that by returning the Parthenon Marbles, this would create an avalanche. I'm afraid to say that the avalanche is already here. I'm very glad to see that the Smithsonian is doing this move. Multiple European museums, the Musée de l'Homme, museums from Germany and the Netherlands have started repatriating, in fact, museums from Britain have started repatriating artifacts to African countries. And so, that avalanche is here. And in fact, the Parthenon Marbles, in my mind, are actually an opportunity for the British Museum, because Greece is one of these very few countries that actually are not asking for everything back. There are multiple artifacts from Greece that are housed in the British Museum, including some of the artifacts from the stolen 2000s that were reported earlier this year as missing from the collections. And Greece is actually only asking for its national symbol back. So I think Greece is actually a good precedent for the museum, not enhancing that avalanche effect and potentially allowing the museum to survive for a few decades more, because that avalanche effect at some point might become untenable for global museums.
Dr. Evangelos Kyriakidis, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.